The closing words will be a little bit more lighthearted. They will involve lawyers, because lawyers, and I hope there are no lawyers among us, lawyers are often involved in ethical dilemmas. But we'll hold the lawyers for last. The first thing is that you don't teach morals and ethics and empathy and kindness in the schools. You teach that at home by example. Thomas Edison once said, "Nonviolence leads to the highest ethics, which is the goal of all evolution. Until we stop harming all other living beings, we are still savaging." Albert Schweitzer said, "Ethics is the activity of man directed to secure the inner perfection of his own personality." That's interesting. I can't think of my personality being ever perfect. Potter Stewart said, "Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do." That's a good one. And finally, Albert Camus said, "And I am thinking about a specific individual, and after you hear what he said this quote about, I think you will all agree what individual we're thinking about without mentioning his name." Camus said, "A man without ethics is a wild beast loosed upon the world." Does anybody come to mind when we say that? Okay.
Thank you, Jay. And next we have for our program leader will be Maura. You all know her well, and we appreciate her introducing and presenting our platform today. Thank you, Maura.
Thank you, Gretchen. I will warn you, the platform is a little bit, shall we say, fluid, depending on what people decide to say and talk, because this is discussion. And what came up to my mind was everyday ethics, because here we are at the beginning of a new year, and we've looked at a lot of large ethical issues, and they're huge world-changing things. But, you know, sometimes we often feel like, okay, well, maybe I can help with the environment by doing a little bit more recycling, but we're small. And although all of us small people doing all these things is important, what about just like everyday life? Just what are ethics in our everyday life? And so I it got sent out by the MailChimp, just a few little examples for discussion for just everyday ethics first. And if people come up with more, that would be great. Things like, hey, what if you got too much change back from the grocery store? Should we be eating only pasture-raised animals? Should we be eating animals at all? Is it okay to lie? If it is okay to lie, what are the limits? Where does it stand? What about if I know a neighbor's child is getting in trouble? Do I tell the parents? What are my obligations there? Do I release software I know isn't really ready? That was one of the sort of businessy questions. And I like this one. Is it right to be chronically late for meetings because I'm busy? I really think it depends on the person myself. But regardless of that, I've started some new questions here, and I'd like to see if anybody has any comments about anything, any responses, or any questions. Fred, you can't carry the mic around. You have the Zoom people.
Anybody have anything they'd like to start with?
We have
Right, Mike.
Mike is going to take the mic.
All right, Vladimir Putin, this is the future prediction. Is he going to be killed, resign, deposed, or same old, same old? Those are, I just want to.
That's a good question.
Our predictions as announced last week. Yeah, I know.
The
Well,
MailChimp actually said we were talking about ethics.
I didn't.
But Mike had a good question. It's an interesting ethical question, as in should. No. We went over the previous ones, but Mike actually has a question that I think he's brought something up, which is, you know, we're wondering if Vladimir Putin's going to be killed, right? I mean, because of all the things he's doing. So Then the next question is it ethical to feel positive about that possibility? Does anybody want to address that? Jan does. Hooray. Thank you, Jan.
I got into a little bit of trouble at a meeting a while back when the third or fourth person expressed the wish that someone would die. And it was like, that's was one too many persons. I don't know why I feel that way, but I just really feel that it's not right to wish someone injury or death or anything, no matter what kind of behavior they show. That's just.
I have to say that I agree. I don't know that I would necessarily be sorry if certain people died, but I don't think wishing people to die helps our humanity any. And we've got Kent.
Well, I understand those feelings, but if you compare it to saving people that won't die because that person dies, it makes it a little more difficult for me. Because if Hitler, for example, had been assassinated early as his officers tried, we would have had a shorter war.
A little bit louder in the mic.
We would have had a shorter war if Hitler had died. His officer, one officer tried to kill him. Putin, I don't know if how much his dying would change anything, but I just think it's sure it's not good to kill anybody, but if you weigh the value of the one person versus a bunch of other people, it raises a little conflict in my mind about a balance of good versus evil. So, utilitarianism.
That's a good point. Anybody else want to? Jennifer. And then Amy, maybe? Okay.
All I could say is I don't want anyone to die, but I feel like we would do ourselves a service to understand how we got here, because we keep getting to this point of people having power, and then the easy way out is to take them out. And it doesn't really solve the problem. The ideals are still there. So it's just, we know the person gets removed, but the ideals are still there, and it just gets replaced with another person. So kind of understanding how Putin came to be would be much more beneficial, so we can prevent it from happening again. I think one of the things that happens when we sanction and isolate people is we put their backs against the wall, and we kind of make them do these things and act these ways. And we got to think about that. Like, what are we really doing when we cut people off? You look at, Russia, Iran, all these different countries where it's like you're putting their backs against North Korea, and it's not helping. They're not getting less active. They're being more active in their destruction. So
That makes sense, because if you put their backs against the wall, they have less to lose. Amy was next.
Thank you, Gretchen. Well, I don't necessarily wish them great bodily harm up to and including murder, but I do wish they'd just go away.
That's a very fair comment. John.
In some situations, maybe this is easier, maybe it just seems easy to me, but public safety officers don't think of this. There are occasions where you might have to kill somebody to save a bunch of other lives. Say somebody's holding up a school and shooting the kids, like in Uvalde. But on the other hand, it's a little more problematic. Wouldn't we not be better off if somebody pushed Putin out of a window, especially if they've done it 9 to 10 months ago? I'm not sure, but because it might have happened anyway. Whoever took his place would maybe follow the same policies. But there probably are times where shooting somebody who's carrying an M15 would save lives, and almost certainly would have saved lives.
And Mary.
I think I heard that you said that somebody fell out the window a few months ago, but I thought I understood that at least 2 people in Russian leadership fell out windows over this Christmas holiday. Yeah, that it's very strange. These windows are getting out of hand.
Look at that particular situation in a different way. Putin's, I mean, they're obviously at war with Ukraine. If you buy into the just war theory and all that, you know, it could be looked at as just part of combat to do away with a leader who was creating war, as opposed to someone who shall not be named as a politician who is just wreaking havoc on everything. You know, there wouldn't be any justification that way.
That's a good differentiation.
Well, I think Putin's really at war in excess of against the West, because to me, it's a proxy war, primarily between the US and Russia, and we're using Ukraine in a way to achieve that. It's very sorry, and this country may be destroyed before anybody stops, but it's a terrible situation, and in a sense, the more we feel it, the longer it goes on. Now, I don't know if ending it earlier would be bad or good in terms of settlement, but we just say more and more feel that goes on and on. So,
That's a good, oh, we have Gordon.
Hello. Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year, Gordon. Thank you.
And I have a feeling that the writers of history don't care what we think. And don't care what our opinion is, because opinions aren't directly responsible for history writing. Putin is writing history by doing what he's doing. And what the rest of us can do is form opinions about authoritarianism that sneaks its way into conservatism politically in this country and other countries. That there are these co-happenings that we can observe and we can talk about and we can point to, we can write about them and make songs about them. And that's the way that our ethics can get expressed without the power that politicians like Putin has. But I think that Putin is much more interesting to see on the news than Stalin was. Stalin was really ugly, if you're old enough to remember him. But so anyway, I'm just saying that you know what we consider important as far as opinions go don't really count, because we're not writing history directly as power people are. And the power, unfortunately, the power people follow the path of authoritarian rule. And so that's the thing that we need to talk about. We need to vote against. In my situation, American socialism or democratic socialism of America is the way to do it. Bernie Sanders route. So that has its play in the history writing through time and through our associations and through communication and getting the word out in a knowledgeable way that we can analyze. And so that's the communication network has its play. That's what is important, I think.
So I think I'm going to paraphrase you a little bit, Gordon. So the passive ethics side of what you're saying is to understand that these authoritarian rules and habits are obviously bad for us and bad for countries. And then the way to activate some of those ethics would be to do things like vote, demonstrate, write, sing, and so forth. So we get our voices out there some too. Would that be? Okay, so we have a Fred.
Actually, we have a Charles Dorothy. He said, I think that killing someone who is in the act of killing you or others is ethical. Consequently, the assassination of Putin would be ethical.
Well, and again, I think that goes back to what Jan mentioned, which is the ethics of somebody who's at war. It's a little bit different than somebody who's just a leader who's just being awful in general, but not necessarily deliberately causing death. Oh, we have a response from Mary. A strong response, judging by the way the arm went up.
Why?
Why what?
Why is it okay if you started a war, but it's not okay if you didn't?
Well, if you're a leader who's engaged in a war and you're killing a lot of people, then you're already engaged in the killing process. Whereas if you're a leader who's just being a really horrible person, it becomes a little less justifiable for the ethical person, at least hypothetically.
Hey, I hear you, but more people are dying, so to say that's more ethical doesn't sound so good to me. I'm just saying.
I think the problem is if we all started knocking off all the leaders that were doing questionable things, we would probably end up with more leaders who did the same questionable things.
No, the war in Ukraine, we have a quote from the Vietnam War where some military man said we had to destroy that village to save it. And Ukraine's been destroyed. I mean, I agree with the Secretary General of the UN that we should have a ceasefire of some kind and talks long before. Now, different sides have different points, but it's being destroyed. And so what is going to be left? I think it's better to stop all the killing. You got to work something out. Even though you might not go what you want. And I hate what Russia is doing because it's very aggressive now with all kinds of weapons, but it's going to keep on. Ukraine will destroy, and then who wins?
Restaurants and it's all right.
We have a blue and then maybe a Jan.
I mean, you know, if I
Yeah,
drown,
I'm not gonna really make the comment. I want to talk to what Jennifer said is the idea of addressing the ideas that even if you knock off somebody, if you don't somehow change the way that people think and accept those ideas, then you're going to repeat it. Now, having said that, the other day I was outside with my neighbor and we were talking and got onto the subject of the New Deal and thinking, you know, there was a time in this country where it seemed like the liberal path was so strong and that it was, and then we had, you know, Supreme Court that was extremely liberal, you know, and it just seemed like that was the path. And then all of a sudden, we're back to being very conservative again. So how do you actually change those ideas so that they don't come back? Because it seemed like we were defeating them only for them to rear their heads again. So I don't know the answer, but something I was thinking about the other day.
Well, I think some of the answer is it always goes in cycles. If something goes one way for a while, then human nature being what it is, often it then does go in the other direction. And we've seen that in this country repeatedly.
There are thoughts that are no longer. I mean, there are certain things that we have done away with. I mean, the idea of stealing land from Native Americans, that we may do it occasionally. We still, I mean, if you ask the majority of the people, you know, they're slavery, you know, I don't think we're ever going to go back to that thought, you know, in this country at least. So sometimes it works that we do eliminate certain ideas that don't recycle. So how do we do it? I just don't know.
The arc of justice is really slow.
Maybe another topic of ethics now?
Yeah, now that we've talked about some of the big world ethics, maybe we'll switch back to a little world ethic. I don't know about you all, but one of the things I like to read in the paper, and Fred thinks I'm ridiculous, is the advice columns, because I always like to read them. And then I think about whether I agree with how it gets responded to and so forth. And recently there was somebody who wrote in, and they have their next door neighbors are friends, and they have teenagers, and the person who wrote in is friends with the parents and also friends with these teenagers. And one of the teenagers was secretly vaping in their bedroom. And so there was this dilemma of, do I tell their parents? Because I feel like their parents should know, but maybe I shouldn't tell the parents because, you know, then I might break trust with that kid and not have as good a relationship. And what do I do about this? And before I say what the person who answered it said, I would like to hear other people's responses to this. What do you do if your good neighbor's teenage kids are sneaking around doing things they shouldn't and you see it?
I just wanted to add, I read that same thing and they were able to see it because he was doing it in front of a window without the shade drawn and could see him hiding there, sneaking the vape.
And in fact, one of the suggestions the person who wrote in said was, maybe I should just tell the kid to lower their curtain, which is kind of. So, thoughts, responses?
Well, first you can tell the kid to stop. It probably won't help. The kid probably continue, but at least you can tell the kid. And yeah, maybe tell the parents too.
One argument against telling the kid to stop, I would say, is if the kid finds out that you can see them, they might then simply do it somewhere you can't see them. And so then you don't know. So have you dealt with the problem, or have you just shuffled the problem away from yourself? Jan?
Just gonna say, you could phrase it such that, you know, I see what you're doing and I think it's harmful to you. Either you tell your parents or I'll tell your parents.
Oh, now that's a very good answer.
Yeah.
Well, does it depend on what they're vaping? I mean, it's all that bad under their drugs. You can
The thing that with vaping is the people who started putting out the e-cigarettes, to put them out with this idea of, hey, this will be a way to get people off of regular cigarettes and slowly quitting. And then, of course, what they really did was put a bunch of really cool flavors in these vapes that teenagers would like. That wasn't the idea at all. The whole idea of vaping from these people who were selling it was to get more people hooked. So yeah, it's really bad. Because not only are you smoking, but you're smoking something through heated plastic, which I really don't think is too good for you. It's definitely less regulated than cigarettes too.
And don't they all have nicotine?
They do all have
Right,
nicotine.
so-
Absolutely. The vapes are not technically illegal, except that the teenagers who are smoking them are underage, and therefore it is illegal for them. But it's also targeted towards them, which is, you know, another larger issue.
So I think the issue that you raised, I agree with Jan's solution. I think it's a really good one, simply because it's a person who is underage. And as part of a community, you have a responsibility to help raise the child, right?
Takes a village.
So the issue becomes a little bit more complex if it's another adult who is doing something that's potentially harmful to him or herself, and you're aware of it. Do you tell their friends or not, etc.? And in that case, I would say having a conversation with that person and explaining to them your opinion of what they're doing, and that they probably shouldn't do it, is a good thing. But I might draw the line at telling all their friends that they're doing it, simply because it's putting yourself sort of above the other person in their own opinion of what they should do.
That brings me to a different question. You've just segued beautifully, because the other version of teenagers is really elderly parents who are, for example, non-compliant with, say, blood pressure medication. And the questions of what to do about that, especially if you know that they're lying to their doctors and lying to their other children. What are your ethical obligations and options then? And we've got Jennifer in the back.
I'll speak to that personally as a case manager. But to piggyback off of the kid, I agree with Janet to go to them and say, hey, you got to say something, or I'm going to say something, because the other part of this is that there have been a lot of hospitalizations of kids who have pneumonia, like double lung pneumonia, because of these vaping materials. And so if they don't know what the kid is doing, they may not necessarily come to the right conclusion if they don't know, oh, this kid vapes, this is probably what the cause of it is, they can get into a lot of trouble. Healthcare wise, when they become adults, as a case manager and being ethical as a case manager, the reality is that as long as they're aware, and this is what we're taught too, like as part of my being a certified case manager, if they are aware of the risk involved in not taking their blood pressure medication, they're aware of the risk involved of not taking their insulin. What we can push is the understanding, for example, if you're not going to take your insulin, right? This is something that will kill you. What we can do now is start setting up hospice because you're refusing this treatment. They can do pain management for you. They can make sure that you're comfortable as you exit this world. It is not the most comfortable conversation, right? But the reality is that we have to let them know, if you do not do this, you will die. Insulin's a little bit more black and white because it can happen pretty quickly. Blood pressure medication, on the other hand, is a little slower. People don't typically see a lot of the issues until it's way too late, until they're on dialysis. But the same approach is, okay, so you're not going to take this medication. We can enroll you in the hospice if your blood pressure gets out of control. There's not much we can do about it. If you don't want anything done, it gets really tricky because people kind of look at you crazy when you're like, well, if you're not taking your medication, this is what will happen. You will die. But as a case manager, when they're adults, we give them the information, we let them know what the consequences are, and they get to make that decision, and we support them through it. It's not always easy for kids of these adults because they're like, well, I want my parent to be here, and why can't they just take the pills? But that's what we offer them. Kids is a little different because they're still under the vice of the parent. So you have some obligation to tell them and all that, but it does get really tricky when it's adults and chronic diseases that are not detrimental immediately, like blood pressure.
And we have Fred.
So I was just going to respond. The only time I see where it would be possible to try to intervene is if the person was incapacitated in some way mentally or could not make a rational decision on their own for one reason or another. But other than that, I agree with you, sure.
I will mention one thing. I totally agree, Jennifer, with what you said. And I will also say it's really difficult to be the person watching people make aggressively poor choices, because especially if you know that, this sounds really awful, but if somebody were going to stop taking this, that, or the other medication, and then they would just die like that, and they're quite old, that would be sad, but that would be their choice and everything. That what's frustrating is usually it's not going to be a fast death. Usually bad things are going to happen first, and being aware of that and then still having to step back, that's a hard thing. But I mean, but it is. I think unfortunately, I do agree with you, Jennifer. It's just a hard thing to learn.
Well, and that's all I was going to say, which is to say that you owe your elders relations, respect, that you might not agree with them, but it is their life to choose. And
absolutely,
whether they choose to prolong it or not is ultimately their decision. I think sometimes I've struggled a little bit with being honest about some things with siblings, and have finally come down to the fact that, yeah, you have to be honest with siblings, because it's like the kid going into the emergency room. I always felt like my sibling needed to go into the hospital room and not tackle a doctor about something that I knew that the parent was doing or not doing that was leading to them being there. Yeah, and I think everybody deserves to, in the family unit, to know what's going on, and that's not tattling, that's informational value. But I never thought that if, as my father said to me,
I don't care. I want to die, that I had the ability or the right to say, well, no, you don't want to. I did have the right to say. It was interesting because when he said that to me, he said, and I don't want to have the test. And I said, well, I want you to have the test because I want all of us to go in knowing what this is, not guessing what this is. But once we really know what it is, then whether you want to die or not die is your decision. It's not mine.
General question for the audience. We can turn the camera around. The Zoom people are only seeing Maura.
That gets very boring. All right, Zoom people, you get to see other people than me. This is an awesome thing.
I have a thought in regards to some of what you said, Mar. If the older person has decided for their own reasons not to behave. And as you pointed out, it's not necessarily going to kill them right away, but it'll cause other things to happen.
Which impacts other people.
Right. So where are you then in the point of like, well, because you decided not to take your medicine, now I'm having to deal with your lack of ability to do this or to do that, and it's falling on me because of your choice. Where do you then turn around and say, you made that choice for you, but you don't get the right to make it for me, so I'm going to step back and not be there for you. Now that's maybe the hard part, because you still want to take care of them, but it's their bad choices that are making you deal with the worst aspect of it.
And that is a hard question.
All right, so I've got Charles Dorothy here. I think we owe a duty to let the parents of minor children know if their children are doing something that is harmful to themselves or others. It is our duty to help young people grow up wait a minute.
We're pausing. He's getting his glasses.
To harmful things. Where we go? To not do harmful things to themselves or others. You are not that child's parent. They are not you. You have the right to discipline, and they are not you, and they not you have the right to discipline and educate their children. A tougher question is if you have talked to the parents and the inappropriate behavior continues, should you contact child services?
Ooh, that's actually a really interesting question. And, I think I'm going to turf it to our case manager.
Yeah, that's tricky, because when it does become harmful, the advice is to come, involve Child Protective Services. But it's their job to investigate. It's not on us to say this is harmful or not. That's what they're employed to do. When they go out, they do an investigation, they have their set of guidelines, and then they determine, okay, this is a harmful environment. We need to do some mitigation. So yes, and there is adult protective services as well. So if you have issues where adults are not, you don't feel like they're safe, it's the same process where you call and they investigate and then they, do their thing. Yeah, so that's all I'll say about it.
I actually know somebody who had a stepmother who was abusive to her elderly father, and she ended up calling Adult Protective Services for that very reason.
Yeah, so I had this experience where I've been in association with 4 different Vietnamese families for about 15 years, refugees. And they use corporal punishment with their kids over there anyhow, and here too, probably. In this case, that was happening. So the grandfather really beat up this kid. I mean, I saw him when I went over there. I saw him and I said, "What happened to you?" And he had a black eye and bruises, And he told me. So I recorded a statement from him. I took some photos. And I went to the father. I said, "If you ever do this again, I'm going to put you in jail." He's never done it again in about 7 years. I thought about protective services, but they don't have the best reputation in terms of going in and breaking up families, like in this case, you know, they would take the father out, the breadwinner. And so that's a real dilemma when you have to make a decision as to whether or not to do that. And like I said, what I've read about them is their reputation there is not so great in terms of maintaining family unity. And what I wanted to see is for them to go in there and talk to him, and you know, and get him into therapy. But they wouldn't do that. And that was a better solution to me than going in there and yanking him out of the family. So.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I have got a friend who's from Poland, and her parents got really upset when her sister gave them a timeout bench for their little 4-year-old daughter many years ago. And Aggie's mom says, "That's so mean. Why would you do that?" And Aggie's like, "Mom, you used to beat me." Some of it's times and culture. My brother years ago, my brother is 57 now. He was in elementary school, and my parents got a call from the elementary school, and they came in for this parent teacher principal conference, and they walked in, and the teacher and the principal looked really angry, and they're going, "What's going on?" And "Your son says you beat him." And they're like, "We don't beat him." And I think if that happened today, that a lot of people would fear that if you said something like that, the child would be whipped away. And in fact, sometimes it's just, you know, somebody deciding to lie to teachers so they can see what happens.
Well, and I find it useful to say, because cultures are different, to say, this is not okay in my culture to whoever's being abused. And I would like to do something about it, but it will probably have consequences. And I want you to know that I would like to do it, but I want you to tell me whether that's, in your opinion, a worse outcome than not doing it. Because I dealt with Muslim people where it was quite different. And I really felt that way. I felt like it was not appropriate, but I felt if the child, and I'm using that term loosely because they were probably 18 at this point, if they really didn't want it, for me to go and create a stink, if they were going to deny everything because it was more important for them to keep the family together, was not a useful thing.
Blue also had a comment after Fred.
Okay, I'll read, Charles had a further point. As far as an elderly person who is refusing essential health care, when do you have the responsibility to seek a guardianship and the parent loses the right to make decisions for themselves? And so that was a general question, but
well, I think there would have to be
my thinking is that it would have to do with the mental
limited mental
competence,
capacity would have to be involved.
and you may not be able to judge that. So that makes it a difficult thing.
Yeah.
Just to kind of piggyback on what you touched on, the question going back to the vaping issue, is the question that the child could come back at you with is, why are you looking in my mirror? Why are you looking in my window?
If you've got your window wide open like that and you're
Yeah, but it still could be a question. I mean, when I was a teacher, I had a student, we had a very special relationship with me, and she was getting in trouble with another teacher. And she said straight to my face, "Hey, if they cause me too much, I'll just accuse them of touching me."
Oh,
so that is it. And then when I was an attorney, I was in domestic violence, and a lot of girlfriends, when they get into a fight with their boyfriends, will call the cops and say that they were inappropriate, even though they may not have been. But because of that issue is such a charged issue, you can't dismiss it. So you do have to take it. But time after time, I'd go into court and the girlfriend would want to take it back. And it's like, well, no, this is a criminal case, not a civil. It's the case of the state that gets to choose. So even if you're retracting,
Might be
the
too
state
late.
Still has the right to pursue it. So my question is, you know, if you're looking in a kid's bedroom, sure, it may be what you're saying, the window straight open and all that, but they could still accuse you of looking at other times.
I think that's a good point. This particular episode was written by a woman who wrote the letter in, and she just basically said, you know, standing in their kitchen, there's the kid's window wide open and the kid's standing there. So I don't know if that, I understand your point, but I'm not sure it's completely valid within that one circumstance. But Gretchen also read that letter, so she may have a comment.
Well, we do have the concept of peeping toms, even if the window's open. I just want to say about vaping. I know people that vape marijuana. That was my question about whether they're vaping. When I grew up in the rural South, corporal punishment was ordinary, done all the time. And also the neighbors who were related were expected to tell you if you did something wrong, and we expected the network. Things would get back.
The thing with corporal punishment that's interesting, we just had a discussion with a friend about this, and I also talked with my older brother because my father, you know, my brother got the receiving end of corporal punishment. And it's really ineffective anyway, because like if you get punished because you've just set the curtains on fire, you probably set the curtains on fire or did something else stupid because you're like, oh, that would be cool, because you're 14 and your frontal lobes haven't even finished developing. And so you're not going to think about, hey, I'm going to get beaten if I do this next stupid thing. You're still going to be thinking, hey, let's do this next stupid thing because it's cool. It's not very effective.
I don't know. I thought as a younger person, and I very rarely ever was on the receiving end of corporal punishment. We occasionally would get spanked, but it was at a younger age. And I thought it was very effective. My mom would say, when your dad gets home, you're going to get a spanking for whatever it was. I think one time I was jumping on a coffee table or something. and we were scared to pieces about that. And it was, you know, very controlled. It wasn't like him going crazy or anything like that. And as a younger person, I think it was quite effective. You wanted to avoid that. And it was probably something in the long run that we kind of knew wasn't good to do, but as a, you know, little kid,
Well, like if a
don't
little
think
kid, if a
ahead.
toddler's starts to put their hand on a stove burner and you tell them no, and they get ready to do it again, sometimes a little quick tiny pop is a good deterrent. Hey, no, don't do that. But like beating a teenager with a belt, that's probably not going to really help.
yeah, teenagers, I don't know.
By that
but
time, it's a little late.
yeah.
And we have another comment. Kent.
Well, one problem with corporal punishment, when I grew up is, I hate to say it, but we had 4 kids 2 years apart. And my mother would line us up and beat us all until somebody confessed.
Oh, wow.
And it's usually my older sister who was very compassionate and still a caretaker. But that was a very bad way to do it. And did she say, talk to your father when he comes home? My father would say, well, try to do better next time. So
I think the father probably had a more successful approach, but that's just my thought.
Well, and one time I was told when your dad gets home, and he came home with a box with a kitten. And I was good ever after.
It's amazing. Sometimes positive reinforcements work better. I will say at the SPCA, the Wake SPCA where I volunteer, they don't do any negative punishments for dogs. Like if the dog is jumping on you, you don't smack it or yell at it. You turn around. I mean, none of the negative punishments for the dogs are really very effective. They just mostly end up making the animal trust you less. So and it doesn't mean that it's easy to do it this other way, but I don't think that ethical is always easy. And I think that's part of the point. We have an Amy.
Well, I was just thinking about another topic. So
Yeah.
one of your questions was eating pasture-raised animals, or should we be eating animals at all? Are we going to get to something like that?
We absolutely can.
Okay, so right now.
Sure.
When we first moved to North Carolina in '94, the only meat that was available was from the grocery stores. And that was all the chicken was Tyson, and the pork, the chicken pork were from Tyson, and the beef was from feedlots somewhere in the west. And so we were vegetarians for a number of years. Well, that diet for omnivores got really boring, I have to admit. And but during that time, our local farmers markets and our farmers started raising animals locally. So we knew they were well cared for and humanely treated. And so now we do eat much less meat, but locally processed and raised. So that's my admission.
Well, I think that makes sense. We have a Fred and then a Hugh, or a Hugh and then a Fred.
Yeah, so I'm like 95% vegan, and except for the cream in my coffee, which I'll never give up. But I don't agree with Amy. The idea of taking care of an animal and then slaughtering it after you've been taking care of it for its life, I don't consider that humane in any sense of the word.
Fred was, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a vegetarian, and I eat meat. But to me, it's a question of what kind of creature are you in the world? Is it, I don't think it's unjust to eat other animals. I think other animals eat other animals. I think it's a, I hate to use the word natural because it's so horribly abused. But it's the way of the world to me. And I understand people who find it offensive or inappropriate, and I can see why. But I do draw the line at torture. And I think some of the ways that meat is raised in this country amounts specifically to torture.
Factory farmed pigs.
Pigs are a very, very good example. Factory farmed pigs. Pigs are smarter than dogs, if you've ever been around pigs. And if you did to a dog what they do to pigs, they would put you in jail. And I find that immoral, unethical, and horrible. And I refuse to support that. But I think that humanely raised animals, we differ.
We have a rebuttal
Go for
coming.
it.
Yeah, well, the reason I do it is for the environment. If you know what cows do and methane do, health, it's a healthier way to live. We live longer. I'm going to live longer. And I don't believe in this idea that it's a natural thing to kill. I mean, that's a hell of a statement to make. We don't run around killing each other like animals do in nature, you know. We're ostensibly ethical. And so I just don't believe in killing anything that doesn't bite me.
So it's okay to kill mosquitoes. That's a good thing.
Well, I know someone used to inspect pig farms and chicken farms for certain industrial standards. There were more pigs and more chickens in North Carolina than people. Which are also stacked up. And legally, I think so-called free range is theoretically the chicken could back out onto a little platform. But it's not the same thing as pasture fed. But this is industrial farming is a big deal, and that's how most of us get things.
I think it's an ethical dilemma, not only for the animals, but as you said, also for the environment. That's a good point.
There's a lot to that argument that animals, chickens and pigs and hogs are living beings. There's a little problem. There's something I'm kind of fond of, and Jean is too. Cats. We are omnivores. I could be a vegetarian if I had to be. My cats cannot be. Cats cannot be vegetarian.
Cats are obligate carnivores. They must eat real meat. And vegetarians who feed their cats non-meat diets shouldn't have the cat.
I agree. That's what I've heard. And back home, I have one cat, the sweetest serial killer in the neighborhood. She's always bringing something in, and she don't mind a bit. But that's, if you're gonna, what are you gonna do with your cats?
I worked for Oscar Mayer Pig Factory for 10 years before it got sold to Kraft. And the way that they kill pigs were in Davenport, Iowa, where I work, is very humane. There's an immobilizing conveyor, there's a gas chamber, and then they get poked in the neck and they bleed to death while they're asleep because of lack of oxygen. So as they ride on this immobilizing conveyor, which tilts toward the slit in the throat, which allows gravity to remove blood. So, but there's, so I would say that it's not too bad to.
What I would
Uh,
say is
and
they
that's
might
all.
be killing them in a humane way, but they're not letting them live in a humane way. When they have a pig in a cage that they can't turn around in, that's just not humane.
Well, there is this background notion of respect for life, I think, that goes into the making of a lot of vegetarians. And just generally, it creates a profile of ethics that is positive. And most animals can't abstractly reason like we can, so they don't have that option of deciding on ethical issues. But there is this matter of respect for life, and if you, I forgot my point. Sorry.
Well, the respect for life, really, if we're going to be truly globally ethical, should extend not just to human life, but to other life on the planet. So yeah, I agree with you, Gordon.
I have less problems with the eating meat in terms of, yes, I think they should be raised ethically and they should have a life that's worth living. And then as long as they're dispatched in a way that's not really cruel, then I'm okay with it. I guess the one that is always fuzzier to me is the people who want to do away with animal testing at every level. And I think there are things that I can do without. I think if I ever wore mascara, whether the mascara was, perfect and I had to harm some animal to find that out, I would have a problem with.
Mhm.
But I think there are other things that I find legitimate to use animal testing for. So that's much more where my gray areas come.
So for example, maybe medical testing that uses maybe rats or chickens, whatever, that's a grayer area for you. Or cats. We've got another Zoom audience comment.
Charles had this is on a different topic. Another question. His question was, is it ethical to incarcerate homeless people until a determination is made? Hang on a second. Somebody just put in a comment and pushed his away. Let me start over. Is it ethical to incarcerate homeless people until a determination is made as to whether that person has a mental illness, is a danger to his or herself or others, and should involuntarily receive mental health care? Is that a clear question?
So are we talking about incarcerating them in a prison system? I'm not sure I completely understand Charles's question. Some cases, my personal opinion on that is no, that's not ethical because they're people just like everybody else. But does anybody else have a thought? If they're being checked to see if they're mentally okay, then you don't have a definite that they're not yet, though. So incarcerating them on the suspicion of not being okay, my suspicion would be that part of the reason somebody would think that is because they are not living in a home. And I think that that's a little bit prejudiced.
It seems to me that they should not have any legitimate excuse, the authorities, to take a person off the street without them having the suspicion of committing a crime of some sort. They shouldn't be able to just remove someone from where they're standing just because they think they may be mentally incompetent.
Yeah.
They should have had to have done some sort of action that legitimizes them being pulled
Just
into
like any other
custody.
person. Yeah. Jan?
I think the whole system is just so screwed up that it's really hard to, without facilities, create situations where people are actually being given the proper help. There's not enough spaces. They don't have enough community health care. They don't have the people on the streets who can diagnose, if you will, or figure out what to do. It's a dilemma for police who are charged with keeping order. If someone is acting in a disorderly fashion, they don't have the skills to help with the mental health issues. And if they're fearful for the person's safety, it might be the only place, jail might be the only place to put this person. So until there are facilities and structures in place.
And better
Turkey has
resources.
Several projects going right now with essentially something like caseworkers being called in cases where there's mental health issues on. And I don't know where how they're treated or what they're doing, but it's seen as relatively successful in getting this out of the police hands. So if things can keep going in that direction, then it'd be great to handle this.
I think Fred has another Zoom audience question or
No,
comment.
Fred has a Fred comment.
And
that is, there's kind of a slippery slope because you can look at, say, the Gulag system in the former Soviet Union, where if you committed a crime, you must be crazy, and therefore they can lock you up. Mental health can be used as a tool of control.
It can be weaponized.
It can be weaponized.
No, it said in the Soviet Constitution that the Soviet Union was a workers' paradise. And if you disagreed with them, you must be insane. And that's how you could put people in jail. Not that was not just a crime. Just thought crimes would get you institutionalized.
After Kent, I think Jay has a comment.
I've read some reaction by people who are or have been mentally ill to the proposal, specifically in New York. And a lot of the things, it's really about getting people off the street more than care for their health.
Hide the problem better.
Hide the problem better. And I think we realize if half the homeless people in the country in California, which I think they are, the price of housing is very relevant. So, there, but for the grace of God, go a lot of us.
Yeah. Yeah, but Jay had his hand up.
The whole issue of homelessness, and it's not the only one. It occurred to me that they say, yes, the ethical thing to do is have plenty of facilities and care and resources for all these homeless people. But it's just never going to happen. Not in our culture, because limited resources, and maybe in some Scandinavian countries, they've got it nailed, but they don't have the same type of diverse populations and challenges. So what I was going to suggest is, I don't think it's ever going to be possible for us to act ethically every time in every situation. Now, if somebody gets extra change from the clerk at the food line, that's an easy one. You say, yes, I'll give it back, or no, I'll put it in my pocket. But these complex issues like homelessness and everything else, we might be ethical in one part, but we're going to be unethical in another part, because the world is just not perfect, and we either don't have the resources or the backbone to improve it.
Thank you. So I have a response from Vera. Her comment is about Charles' question. It is not ethical. It would be ethical to provide shelter and test only those who consent to testing.
And after Jean talks, I might do a couple of tiny wrap-ups.
It seems to me that the base issue in that, because it gets abused, is in a public space, at what point do you have the ethics that you can object to another person's presence? And I probably would like to be very ethical and say that unless they're harming me, that they have the right to be there in whatever condition they're in. I know myself better to know that I've been, for example, somebody mentioned California, and I have been on subways when I have viewed homeless people, and I don't know that I thought that they were going to get me, but they were not people that I wanted to be next to. And in a sense, I was making a judgment about their right to be in a public space with me, and I wish they weren't, as unfortunate as that is.
I like the honesty there. I think that was really good. Thank you all for participating. So I think just about everybody here actually had things to say, which was extremely helpful. I'm going to wrap this up very quickly. Another thing I read when I was looking up some things for this was talking about the fact that as far as like living daily ethical lives, sometimes you need a systematic way to approach. So then they had some questions that if you use them daily, you can think about the how-to of everyday ethics. So I'm just going to add that in and then toss it back over to Gretchen. These questions: did I practice any virtues? You know, were we nice to our kids? Were we nice to our animals? Were we polite to the cashier who took way too long? All this sort of thing. And then, or did you cross a line where you were really rude to the cashier because they were an idiot? I mean, that's sometimes very tempting, having been on both sides of that. And then, did I do more good than harm today? Because, you know, Jay had the point of there's so many things that we can't necessarily hit every time. We're not going to be ethical every time, but I think striving towards doing more good than harm is part of the way to get us closer to it, because it's not anybody is going to be ethical all the time. None of us are, just like none of us are going to be perfect, except at being, you know, bad sometimes. Did I treat people with dignity and respect today? You know, did I look at my mother-in-law and think, I can't believe you're not doing this? Or did I say, hey, this is your choice? Sometimes treating people with respect is not easy. And sometimes treating the people who need the respect the most are the ones who get on your absolute last nerve, as Jean just said. And then, was I fair and just today? Did I treat people fairly and justly? Or did I just decide, you know, oh, that person's homeless, I don't want them sitting next to me on the subway? I mean, that's hard, especially if they smell funny or they look like they might try to take things. But that's a judgmental sort of a thing that it's hard to overcome. And then, was my community better because I was in it? Was I better because I was in community? And I would say with this group today, absolutely yes. And I really appreciate you. We'll hand it back to Gretchen.
So next, do we have any announcements? Oh, well, yeah, I think that's obvious. We're passing the baskets, and while we do that, do we have any announcements?
I have an announcement. As soon as I unfold my piece of paper. We have a program next week. Do not come here. We will not be here. It will be Zoom only. All second Sundays of 2023 will always be Zoom only. Our Zoom program for next Sunday will be featuring our illustrious president, Fred, talking about artificial intelligence technology and ethical cultural values. You want me to read the abstract? So his abstract for the talk is artificial intelligence and machine learning software applications are rapidly reshaping our future. Applications of this powerful new technology are now touching many aspects of our lives, including finance and banking, justice system, healthcare, military, social media, and others. Fred Bright will give a brief overview of artificial intelligence algorithms, and we will try not to fall asleep during that part, and how they can be harnessed to solve complex problems. We will then discuss some successes and failures of the technology with an emphasis on social justice and ethical cultural values. We look forward to seeing you on Zoom next week.
Here's Mary.
A little practical issue. I brought a few cans, but I want to take home the bag I brought them in, and I don't see another bag. So if anybody knows where there's a brown paper bag for my cans of food, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, Jennifer.
Just a reminder for Change for Change, there is a new organization. I have yet to get the name. It's likely going to be a local organization that works on bonds. I know there was a group that came and talked to us maybe last year, the year before, about bond support for people who were in cars or put in jail and they don't have money to get out on for bond because of their whatever financial situation. So look forward to that. And thank you all for your support for the last organization, and they are very happy. We'll get that money out to them at some point this quarter. Thank you.
Okay, Jay.
Yes.
I mentioned at the top that attorneys are always involved in ethical challenges, and at the time I wasn't thinking that we have at least one or two attorneys among us. So I've edited out the worst of the lawyer jokes I was going to say, and I apologize to you all. But a man walked into a bar with his alligator, and he asked the bartender, "Do you serve lawyers here?" "Sure do," replied the bartender. "Good," said the man. "Give me a beer and serve a lawyer to my gator." A man was sent to hell for his sins. As he was being taken to his place of eternal torment, he passed a room where a lawyer was having sex with a beautiful woman. "What a ripoff," the man muttered. "I have to roast for all eternity, and that attorney spends it with that gorgeous woman?" Jabbing the man with his pitchfork, the devilish escort snarled, "Who are you to question that woman's punishment?" Now, this one does involve a serious ethical issue that probably has come up from time to time. And this is, you'll see. A young attorney in a big law firm was visiting with his client, an elderly woman, when she gets up to leave. While reaching for her cane, a $100 bill falls out of her purse onto the floor, and she hobbles out of the building without noticing. So the young lawyer is faced with a serious professional ethics dilemma. Does he put the $100 in his pocket, or does he share it with his partners? Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Okay, that brings our meeting to a close. I want to thank Mary, who was our greeter today, and Jay for open closing words, Jennifer for lovely refreshments coming up, and Mike for putting our signs out as usual. And thank you, Maura, for running a very pleasant discussion. So our meeting is over, but our fellowship continues. Please give a warm greeting to the person sitting next to you with a smile and a kind word. Thank you. And wash your hands before refreshments.